Well, I read that a lot from people who are just starting out. They always say, like, I'm just not feeling it today. I'm not writing today. I'm just too involved with something else. Like, are you wanting to make money from this, or is it a hobby? Because if it's a hobby, that's fine. I did it as a hobby for years, and I didn't finish any books. So if you want to make money at it, if you want to be a professional at something, you treat it like a job. You get up, you go to your job every day, whether you like it or not.
Welcome to the Author Like a Boss podcast, the podcast for indie authors who want to improve their writing, up-level their marketing, make money with their books, and have fun doing it. Now, onto the show with your host, Ella Barnard.
Hello, everybody. Hello, bosses. Welcome to Author Like a Boss with me, Ella Barnard. I am here today with Rick Partlow. Rick is that rarest of species, a native Floridian. In college, he started writing his first science fiction novel, and he had his first opportunity to self-publish with the advent of ebooks. He figured, what the heck? What is there to lose? And then the strangest thing happened. People actually bought his books. Lots of people, and they really liked them. So he recently began a new series. He recently completed a new series called Last Flight of the Acheron. He recently completed a new series called Last Flight of the Acheron, detailing the wartime experiences of the fleet pilots Sandy Holland and Ash Carpenter. Nope, that's not good enough. We're going to fix that again.
Okay.
He recently began a new series. He recently completed.
The series is actually called Tales of the Acheron.
Yes, I know, and I got that too. Tales of the Acheron. I'm going to just change that. A new series. I did put completed in there somewhere else. Okay. He recently completed a new series called Tales of the Acheron, detailing the wartime experiences of fleet pilots Sandy Holland and Ash Carpenter. Rick, thank you so much for being here and for all your patience with me.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your author journey?
Well, I started writing when I was very young. I was a huge comic book fan. I started reading comic books when I was about 3 years old. And I first got exposed to science fiction via Robert Heinlein's books. I checked them out of the library hundreds of times. I think I've read Have Spacesuit Will Travel thousands of times through my life. And I wanted to write. I wanted to write what I read. And I started writing short stories as a kid. I don't know what happened to them. I wish I could find them somewhere, but they're gone. And when I got into high school, I started trying to write a novel, which was, at the time, I was into the stupid men's adventure books like Mac Bolan, Vietnam vets fighting the mafia. So I wrote something like that, which is horrible, but I finished it. So, I finished my first book when I was about 16.
Wow.
Since then, I think it got lost when we moved at some point. But then I wrote another book when finished it by the time I was 19, which was like a kind of another adventure type story. More like nowadays it'd be like a YA adventure, because I was a YA at the time. But I didn't get serious about trying to write science fiction until I was in college. I was actually in a military history class, and I had this good friend who was really into military history, and we started talking about the future, what government would look like in the future, what a realistic government would look like on an interstellar level. And he helped me come up with something, and I started writing the book that eventually became Duty, Honor, Planet. And back at that time, this is the late 80s, so I was writing longhand on college ruled, notebook
like in a
paper
notebook,
in a 3-ring binder, and doing it very slowly because I was in college, I was in ROTC, I was in the National Guard, so I was very busy. And by the time I got in the active army, I had probably around 200 pages written, really, really tiny writing. I took it with me to Infantry Officers Basic Course at Fort Benning, Georgia. And when I came home for Christmas, I accidentally left it in a drawer and the maids threw it away. So,
no.
Yeah. Well, I was in the Army anyway, and I was too busy to write. So when I got out and got married, and my wife encouraged me to buy a computer so I could, save these things and try to write it again. And I needed to update it anyway because I started it in the middle 80s. So it had a lot of assumptions about the Cold War and the Soviet Union and all that turned out to be against history. So I updated everything. And I finished that book around 1995, I want to say. And I also had another one that I had been working on and off. And I finished that one too about a few months later. I mean, I had a whole bunch of half-started, manuscripts that had to do with that. So I just worked them all out into one plot and finished that, and that became the book called Birthright. So I had these two novels finished, and I went searching for an agent because that's what all the writers' journals back then said you should do. So I may or may not have simultaneously submitted to many agents against their policy. But I got an agent, and although she did not get my books published, she did me the biggest favor as a writer that anybody could have done. She sicked some of the hardest and meanest editors on me that I've ever had, and they just forced me to slice and dice bits of the book out and taught me how to really go over a book for content. And I've been able to use that ever since, which although we parted ways without getting published, I mean, the experience is still good for me. At the time, once she submitted these novels to all the different publishers and I got rejected, I kind of gave up on it because at the time there was nothing else to do. This was the late 90s. And self-publishing back then was vanity publishing, Yes. You paid thousands of dollars to get boxes full of your printed books, and you left them sitting in your garage for, years, and nobody ever bought them. That was the stigma of self-publishing. So I kept writing on and off, but never finished anything else because I lacked the incentive, of actually being published. So come around 2010, people started bugging me saying, you can self-publish your books on Amazon, but at the time, self-publishing still meant vanity publishing in my head, and it carried that stigma with it. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. Only losers do that. So finally, around 2011, one of my best friends finally convinced me, just put them on there. What do you got to lose? People will read them. He is one of the few people that had read them at the time. And I said, okay, what the heck? So I did everything wrong because there was nobody to tell me what to do right in 2011. There weren't any podcasts or blogs or anything that says, here's what you do to self-publish your book. So I downloaded, publicly available images from the internet, not even arranged like a book cover, just little square images, that I photoshopped the title onto. And they weren't correctly, formatted for Kindle or anything. I just slapped them on there, 99 cents a piece. And the first year that they were up, I sold 30,000 copies.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but not knowing what to do, I made the huge mistake of not having anything else written. So all this momentum that I got from selling all these copies just totally went out the window because it took me another year to write another book.
And you didn't have like a newsletter set up or anything because you're just
I had no idea. It was probably until 2014 before I got real covers on the books. So I wrote a sequel to one of the books. Took me 14 months. I wrote a second sequel to that book, finishing up the trilogy, and that took me another 12 months. And then I wrote a sequel to Birthright, and then the third book in the Birthright trilogy, which each took almost a year. So it's 2016. I have 6 books, but it took me 5 years to write 4 of them. So I'm not anywhere near being a full-time author or even a serious author. I'm pretty much a hobbyist at that point. I wasn't plotting my books out. I was just sitting down and sometimes taking hours to write a page. It's because I had this image in my head of what an author was from,
popular culture.
I'm thinking of myself sitting in a cardigan with a pipe,
Yeah. Yes.
sitting there staring at the page.
You've got a glass of scotch there.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So then in 2016, I started getting serious about it. And it started with a book called Glory Boy. And Glory Boy was a book that I'd actually started to write first, before anything else. Just, it was a wartime novel about a kid on a farming colony who gets the I don't know the word I'm looking for, but he gets like inspired that he needs to join the military because he has to defend his planet, but the planet is full of people who are kind of Quakers. They're pacifists, and his family disowns them, and he has to run off and join the military. And then later he comes back and saves them when they're invaded. That was the idea I had. But I had gone away from that. I still had like 50 pages of it sitting on my computer, and I'd never done anything with it. And I'm like, well, this is the same character that I wrote the Birthright trilogy about. Same guy, just later on after the war. So I have like little tidbits about this whole novel sprinkled through these 3 books. Why don't I just write an outline from what I had available and write this book before I go on to something else? Because I was like coming up with all these plots to go into next, and I wasn't sure what to do. So I'll put it off. I'll write this book instead. So this was my first time that I had really done a detailed plot outline, because I had all these details of the war experiences he's had sprinkled through 3 books. So I had to write them all down.
It had to be consistent with the other books.
Unlike all those, it took me less than 3 months to write that book because I knew how everything was going to go. And I had like an epiphany. Wow, if I outline my books, maybe it won't take me a year to write them. I know, it's something nobody's ever thought of before.
It was a revelation.
and I threw Glory Boy online thinking, oh, it's just a nice little extra, for people who've read Birthright. I didn't think anything would come of it. Well, it became a bestseller in its category, and it led me to having an incredible year. And by 2016, it came out in December. And I made like twice as much from 1 month of it than I had from the book before that had come out like 3 months prior, and everything else.
Oh, so like all 6 books.
Yeah.
Okay.
So 2017, somehow, and this is from somebody who had no experience marketing, wasn't doing anything right, as I've said before, without any real marketing at all, this book just took off. And the great part about it was, as anybody who had any experience with this would know, and I did not, having that trilogy about the same character that took place afterwards just made me a whole bunch of money, because people would read Glory Boy and then like, oh, this is a cool character. Oh, there's a whole other trilogy I can read. So I stumbled into doing the exact right thing after 5.5 years. I mean, you know what they say about even a blind squirrel finding a nut. Well, that was it. So I started plotting books. I started writing books are quite a bit shorter, because when I was doing the seat of the pants writing, the books were like over 100,000 words each all the time.
Oh, wow.
So because I just sit there and write whatever came into my head. And now I'm like trying to do a concise plot. So everything's down like 80, 70,000 words, and I can write them in a couple months. So I completed 7 novels in 2017. So
you still have a regular job at this point. When did that happen? When did that transition happen?
The transition to
to just full-time writing?
Oh, well, I still have a job right now. I just don't make nearly as much money from it as I do from writing, but I'm loath to give it up because it's easy work and I can actually get away with writing at work sometimes. Don't tell anybody.
Lips are sealed.
So, but at the beginning of 2017, basically, I knew that I would be making a lot more money from writing than my regular job.
Okay.
So I started to put money into it. I started to put more time into it. I became a lot more serious about being a professional writer rather than a hobbyist.
Yeah.
And here I am.
So you were...
And now I have 15 books.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I started 2017 with 7. Now I have 15.
Wow. So you've been pretty consistent with the 3 months per book.
Yeah,
timetable.
I pretty much take 2 months per book and then a couple of weeks to plot the next one.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I have a couple things I want to point out, which you kind of said kind of casually, but when you were writing YA, when you were a YA, like, you guys, there's nothing wrong. In fact, it's probably a good thing to do is to write what you like. If you like it, regardless, even when you're a teenager, if you like it, chances are other teenagers will like it. If you're, write what you like, the more you like it. If you're bored by your own writing, that's not good.
Well, I know a lot of people, and I respect the heck out of them for being able to jump into something that's outside their interest and write a good book. Like, I know guys my age who write romance novels, and I'm like, I couldn't do it. I haven't never read romance novels.
Yeah.
My mom had thousands of them back in the day, but I never read any of them.
Yeah.
And I couldn't jump into that mindset. I like science fiction and fantasy, and that's what I write. I love thrillers, but I couldn't write a thriller.
Yeah. I'm just giving people permission to write what you like. And then also notice that that Rick, although he kind of took off in 2016, 2017, it was years of writing, getting a little bit better. I'm sure each book got a little bit better, learning the processes that work for him, and then taking off. Although he did take off initially, because I imagine you just had a really amazing story.
Well, I think that in 2011, there was kind of a dearth of self-published novels in that genre. And I know a lot of people who've become really big in science fiction in indie publishing started out about then. Mm-hmm. I mean, Lindsay Buroker. Mm-hmm. Obviously, well, she started out writing science fiction and self-publishing around earlier than me in 2010, and grabbed onto a fan base because there just wasn't enough available. And also in conventional publishing, this is one of the reasons that I started writing science fiction seriously, is in conventional publishing, they're there to make a profit, obviously. They're not there to take chances on people they don't know are going to make a profit for them. So when you go into a Barnes & Noble or Books A Million, which we have more of down here, and look in their science fiction section, you see a lot of the same kind of books. I mean, if you see a new author, they're writing the same kind of book that these other authors are writing. And the science fiction and fantasy section is full of urban fantasy and vampires and zombies, lots of zombies, which I think that's dying out, but there's still lots of zombies on the shelf. And they're full of George R.R. Martin fantasy clones, huge fat books where everybody dies. And what they're not full of is the kind of science fiction that I grew up reading. And there's still a lot of people who like it, which is kind of a hopeful space opera type feel, with the swashbuckling, outer space, broad horizons type of feel to it. there's not that much of it out there anymore.
Yeah.
And there's some established writers who get away with writing it once they've already got their career established and can write what they want. But that's not what the shelves are full of. And there was a big market for that in 2011, and there still is. Mm-hmm. It's a lot more crowded now than it was then.
Yeah. There's a lot more people writing it. I've noticed the same thing. I remember when I was younger, and 15, 20 years ago. I'm aging myself. Yes, you guys. I've been reading for a long time, but I used to be able to go into the bookstore and, it was like every Tuesday, new books came out, and this was before self-publishing was big. And so I think back then, and I don't know if this is just my perception, I don't have any data to back it up, but I could go in and buy a new book in the genres that I liked every week because there was a new one coming out. I think they were taking more chances. And now when I go into the bookstore, it's very discouraging because they have all the series that I've already read because they were really, really popular, or they had a TV show based off of them, like Game of Thrones, or, all these series are there, but you don't see any of the new authors. They're not taking as many chances. I think they're looking for blockbusters, and I love Harry Potter. I like Harry Potter, and I love what Harry Potter did for people in reading. But I think when they realized that traditional publishers could make a lot of money off of one series, they were like, hey, now we just have to get one series and just make it big. And they did that with Twilight, and they've done that with, you can see, George R.R. Martin's now doing it.
I think it started even earlier than that, because I recall in the late 90s, in mid to late 90s, when I first started trying to get published, mm-hmm. that this, I think, and I may be talking out of my yin yang here, but in my opinion, from what I've seen, I think it all started when the family-owned publishing houses started getting bought up by corporations who have to report to boards of directors and stockholders. And you didn't have like someone who was an old patriarch or matriarch who would be in charge. You'd say, yeah, let's take a risk on some new people because I'm looking at the long term. Mm. Well, when you have stockholders to give reports to, you don't look at the long term. You look at what the returns are right now, and you can get those returns from established authors. And I think a lot of that started with Tom Clancy and the techno thrillers, because people ate those books up, and you had a lot of other writers writing similar books, mm-hmm. and you had a lot of ghost writers writing Tom Clancy books, and the shelves started to fill up with Tom Clancy and his imitators. And I think it just became kind of a tidal wave from there, that you have a lot of the same thing on the shelves.
Yeah. Am I echoing for you? Oh,
no.
It just stopped. It's so weird. Okay. So that's, I think it may have been more gradual than we're saying. It may have been more gradual, but I definitely think there's been a movement. So let's get back to self-publishing, you guys. If you hadn't thought about all those things, this is things that I've been thinking about, and apparently Rick has also been thinking about. But now there's incredible opportunities to make money and be successful in self-publishing, because the gatekeepers are no longer the ones who are deciding if people want the books. The people can decide, and you can just meet the demand of those people. So now you are writing regularly, you're writing a book in 2 months, and then you spend another few weeks outlining the next book. What is your writing routine?
I wish it was more regular, but I write 2,000 words a day minimum. Sometimes I write more, but I never write less. If I'm working on a book, I write 2,000 words. And if I have to stay up till 1 a.m, even though I get up at 5:30 to finish those 2,000 words, then I do. Because you can't edit a book if you don't have the book done. No matter how crappy your first draft is, at least it's there. It's a framework you can build something on. If you don't have that, you can't build anything. So I write the words every day. I usually wind up writing about, I'm a slow starter. In the morning, my head takes a while to kick in. So I usually wind up writing about 500 words before noon, and then another 500 before 2:00. And then I write the last 1,000 somewhere between 5 and 8. When I'm kind of a night person, and my regular job requires me to get up early, so those two things don't go together sometimes. But my daughter is in competitive soccer, and she has practices several nights a week. So usually I wind up just taking my laptop in the car, sitting there in the parking lot, and cranking out 1,000 words while I'm waiting for her. So that's my less than Stephen King style routine there.
I love, a lot of people have trouble finding time to write, and a lot of people have trouble finding time to write. And I love that you make the time by doing it while your daughter's at soccer practice or what have you. Like, you're like, oh, I'll just bring my laptop. And because you've made that commitment to those 2,000 words, and you're not going to break that commitment to yourself, you just work it in where you can.
Yeah, sometimes it's inconvenient. Like, we went to Costa Rica last summer to visit my wife's relatives, and I was in the middle of a book, and trying to find time to write 2,000 words when you're in Costa Rica doing all this family stuff was a bit of a pain. But once you commit to it, it becomes something. It becomes like something you do. You brush your teeth, you go to the gym, you make dinner, you make your bed, you write 2,000 words. It's just something you do. And once it becomes a habit, it's not as hard anymore.
Yeah, it's just something you do. I love that so much. I love that so much. There's a thing. I never say these very well, but the concepts always stick with me, which is the difference between 99% and 100%. Like, you think, oh, it's just the 1%. But as soon as you start doing things, if you say, I'm going to do this 100%, and then you let go one time, that one time easily transforms into, well, I didn't do the one time, so next time. So, the 100%.
It's exactly that way for me. If I miss going to the gym once in the week, and it becomes so easy, I'll just skip the rest of this week. I'll start again next week. It's the same thing with writing. If I just said, I got 500 words today, I'll make it up this weekend. Well, no, I won't make it up this weekend. It won't get made up. Yeah. So, got to do it.
100%. And the other thing is, when you commit to something, to doing it 100% or every day, you only have to make the decision one time, or however many times it takes you to make it a habit. But but it's a one-time decision, whereas when it's 99%, it's am I going to or am I not going to every single day, versus the one time where you're like, it's not a question. I already made this decision. I'm just following through on the decision I already made.
And try to explain it to people. To them, it seems so hard to do it every day. Like, I talk to people who, they say, oh, I want to work out. And I say, how do you go to the gym every, so many times a week, or go running or whatever? And it's like, I don't make that decision every day. I already made the decision. I'm just doing it. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing if you choose to write, or whatever your passion is. If you're a sculptor, an artist, or whatever, you don't make the decision every day. Oh, I got to break out the paint, and I got to break out the can. No, you do it because this is what you do. It's what you do every day.
Yeah, I think that's such a professional way of coming to life, and coming to also committing to those things that are important to you and that you also really love and enjoy. And for you, it's like a job. If it's making more money than your current job is, would you
times over? Yes.
Yeah. would you guys, if you're thinking, oh, am I going to go casually, am I going to go to work today to my job or not? You don't get to casually make that decision when you're working for somebody else. So
I read that a lot from people who are just starting out. They always say, like, I'm just not feeling it today. I'm not writing today. I'm just too involved with something else. Like, are you wanting to make money from this, or is it a hobby? Because if it's a hobby, that's fine. I did it as a hobby for years, and I didn't finish any books. So if you want to make money at it, if you want to be a professional at something, you treat it like a job. You get up, you go to your job every day, whether you like it or not. My wife is a pharmacist, and she can't decide, I don't feel like going into work today.
Yeah.
She goes to work.
Yeah. I've been recently doing something with where you put yourself in the mindset of who you want to be in the future, right? So I want to have a podcast on new and noteworthy. So I've been doing these questions. Okay. What would I be doing if I had a podcast on new and noteworthy? And I let myself be that, like, who am I going to, what actions will I be taking once I'm that person? And then whatever differences that comes up between where I am now and what I'll be doing when I'm on new and noteworthy, I make the transition to be doing what I'm going to be doing on new and noteworthy, or if you're an author. So if you're like, okay, imagine I'm making $5,000 a month from my books, and I have all these books out and I have these fans. What am I going to be doing when I have that success? What actions will I be taking every day? And whatever actions that you can imagine yourself taking. And it's not like it's going to be for sure the exact action that you would, but any difference between what you think you'd be doing, like writing 2,000 words a day, you're like, if I was making $5,000, I'd be writing 2,000 words a day. If you're not doing that now, that's the thing to start with, because that's what will get you there.
I got very lucky that I got a little taste of success before I started that, which gave me the incentive to say, I need to do this full time. I need to concentrate more on my writing than my other job. I need to make sure that I do this every day. Some people don't get that, and I imagine it's a lot harder. Well, I know it's harder from back when I started. It's a lot harder to say, yes, I'm going to put this effort in every day when you're not seeing the financial benefits yet.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sure it is harder.
And also nowadays, it's even harder than when I started, because when I started in 2011, marketing wasn't such a big part. I mean, people tried to market, but there weren't the availability. I did a lot of social media style marketing at the time, even though I didn't know that was what I was doing, because I belonged to several different message forums about various things like football or, photography or various other things that I'm interested in. And I knew a bunch of people on these message boards, and then some of them had tens of thousands of subscribers. And I just said, hey guys, I wrote a science fiction book. Here it is. If you're interested in science fiction, this is where it is. And that caused like a word of mouth thing to grow up, which is why I think the books did so well in 2011 when they were initially released. But nowadays, the field's just too crowded, and there's too many authors doing that kind of thing. And a lot of message boards now are like, no, don't shill your own stuff, which at the time, and nowadays I would never do something like that because it's different. But at the time, it was like nobody on there was writing anything. This was just something cool that, people I talked to about science fiction, like, hey, I finally wrote something. Here it is. But now you have to know marketing. You have to know Amazon ads. You have to know Facebook ads. You have to. And I honestly admit I'm not as good at that as I should be. I've tried to do Amazon ads, and I'm not that great at them. I've never had an Amazon ad that did that well. I'm much better luck with Facebook ads. I can do them fine. They're very intuitive. Amazon ads are not intuitive. You basically need a doctorate in Amazon ads to do a good one. And I've been trying to read these books that are out on blogs on how to do a good Amazon AMS ad. It's very, very hard to get the right keywords. And that's the thing I'm trying to work on more. I mean, I'm trying to crank out the books while the inspiration is there and while I have an audience for these characters, but I'm trying to learn more about marketing and how to do this right, because as the market gets more crowded, it becomes the old red queen thing where you have to run twice as fast just to stay in the same place. And that's the.
Mm-hmm. What are you finding? That's moving on to marketing. What are you finding is most effective? Because we know when you started with your marketing, you just said you kind of fell into it, and yeah. What are you doing now? What are you finding the most effective?
Well, I recently got a BookBub, and if you can get one, that's the most effective thing in the world, honestly. It's expensive. I got a BookBub on a collection of one of my series, and this was more of just a promotion to get my name out there, anything else, because it's a series of 4 books, and I put it 99 cents for a week, which is tiny sum for 4 books, but it cost me $700 for that one ad, one time, one email.
Wow.
And yet it made me probably 15 times that back, and it's lasted over a month and a half. The effect of it, it's the most effective advertising out there, but they approve maybe 10% of the people that apply, and I've applied something over 60 times, and I've gotten one international only BookBub, which wasn't nearly as effective, but still paid back what I had into it because it costs a lot less. And then this one, out of all those applications, so it's really hard to get a BookBub. After that, I've had a lot of luck with Facebook ads. Facebook ads aren't as easy to count to figure out how many people are actually clicking through to your book, because the only way is if they click through from the ad to your book. And I know for me, if I see something like that, I'll just bring up Amazon in another browser and look the guy's name up. Before I knew, and if I would do it now, I would do it through Facebook just to help him out. But most people don't know that. So most people are just readers. Will just, Rick Partlow, let me bring up my Amazon, look at him up. So I have no idea about that, but I know that I engage a lot more people with Facebook ads. Amazon ads, like I said, there are so many different ways you can arrange them with so many different keywords and a couple of different types of ads you can use. And I have done over and over and over, and I've yet to find one that will spend all the money that I have allotted to it, because I'm just not getting the clicks that would spend the money. And I've tried different authors' names. I've tried hundreds of keywords. I've tried just a couple of dozen. I cannot find the right combination, and I keep studying, but I know that for some people's genres, for their particular books, that some people do better in Facebook than Amazon. I don't know if you heard of Michael Cooper, MD Cooper. He's a big proponent of Facebook ads, and I am too. I've had a lot better luck at that. So for me, Facebook works really well. If you're trying to give away a free download to promote a series like the first book free, I've had a lot of luck stacking a bunch of sites like Free Booksy, the Fussy Librarian, Book Barbarian. I would stack like 4 of those together and do a Kindle Unlimited, 5-day giveaway on a book. And I've had a lot of success with that. I usually hit around 4,000 downloads in the 5 days with that.
So what you're doing, so you guys, for anybody who's not as experienced as Rick, so if he has a series, and he'll make the first one free and send it for 5 days.
Right.
Make sure that all these newsletter services that announce free books know about it. And they announce it free, and a bunch of people go download the first book for free, and then hopefully if they like it enough to continue reading, then they'll move into the second, third and however many books are in the series. And that's because people are wondering, like, what's the benefit of doing the free? And there's a couple of things, but especially if you have a series, that's the benefit of doing 5 days free and giving it away 4,000 people. And if 10% of them continue on to read the next book or more, I mean, you want more, but that's the benefit of writing a really good story.
Also, if you want to get reviews, because the more reviews your book has, the more impressive it looks to people. Giving it away free is a way to get them. Although I found, honestly, that 99-cent deals get more reviews, because when people got something free, sometimes they'll just leave it in their in their phone or their Kindle or their tablet and never read it. So honestly, the most reviews I ever got off of anything was that BookBub, 99 cents. I got like 25 reviews off of it in the first couple weeks after it was out, which I know some people get hundreds of reviews from ARC readers and things like that. But for me, that was a pretty good return on it. There's a lot of independent authors who have huge staff, I guess, or bevies of advanced review copy readers, and they get them to leave reviews. I've never done that. I've had a couple of people, like 3 or 4, 5 at the most at one time, who I gave advanced reader copies to. But the problem I run into is that a lot of the people take too much time, and I'm trying to, rapid release these things every couple months. So if somebody takes 2 or 3 weeks to finish reading it before they get back to me with things they think should be corrected, well, then, yeah. And then only 2 of them leave reviews. It's not worth it to wait for them, honestly.
For the time factor.
I mean, it's people like Michael Anderle have, hundreds of people that'll review their books and do it in 2 days. And he'll say, do it in 2 days, you're off my list. Well, I don't have that luxury. I don't have hundreds of people lining up to do it. Mm-hmm. Although I suppose I could get them if I put enough time and effort into advertising for them, but I don't know. It just never seemed worth the return to me to do that.
You're so funny. 'Cause the time, just a little feedback. You're spending all this time researching Amazon ads and having no success. You guys, but do what feels good with your, because if you don't like what you're going to be doing, if you don't like if you're a more technical person and you like figuring out Amazon ads, I am the opposite of that. I don't like to do that. And so I'm I'm going to go figure out how to find some ARC readers. But if you, but if you're that doesn't feel good.
I suppose it has to do with if I do Amazon ads correctly, then the people will buy the book and they'll have an investment in it that way. But ARC readers, I've heard horror stories from other people who advertise for ARC readers. They get a lot of people who are like, yeah, give me the free book, never leave a review. Mm-hmm. And then they're like, where's the next one? You didn't leave a review last time.
Yeah.
They wind up ticking people off.
Yeah.
And
whereas Amazon ads is not personal.
No. Also, I can study Amazon ads over podcasts and just play them in my car while I'm driving.
Do you have a strategy for after the Amazon? So after the people click on the ad, after you've done the BookBub, do you then have a way besides just the next series of the book to keep in contact with those people?
Not from Amazon ads. I have a mailing list, which I keep in contact with people, but that's separate from the ads. Most of that I build. I tried originally to build it with the old-fashioned way with an Insta freebie, reader magnet that people would have to sign up for your mailing list to get. Did not have a lot of luck with that. I think I got about 100 people over months with that.
Wow!
And then I started putting short stories into anthologies. That with these anthologies, they would get people to sign up for a free copy using their email, is agree to be on the mailing list, the people in them. And now I have a lot more people on my mailing list than I used to, but it took that route to get it. I know some people have a lot of luck with Insta Freebie with putting a book up there or short stories and getting people to click on it. Maybe I didn't advertise it enough or make it known enough. I tried to put it on social media. I didn't really want to spend a lot of money on that. So, because you're already spending the money on Insta Freebie, but I've a lot better luck with putting short stories in anthologies. There's one, Stefan, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his first name right, Stefan Nardi. He did an anthology called Beyond the Black Volume 1, and I got into that with several, 13 other authors, 14 other authors, and that alone has produced something like 2,800 mailing list signups. So that's a lot. That's a lot of, and a lot of those people have not unsubscribed yet. Knock on wood.
Wow. So do you, when you finish a new book, you send it out to your mailing list. Do you find you get a response from people or an uptick in your sales?
Well, I mean, I don't know because I have no way of tracking whether, I mean, I should probably look into Amazon affiliate links to keep a closer look on whether they click through. But I get a pretty good release. I do better with the first in series because I'm sure you know the further you go on in the series, you're going to lose people each time with each successive book, which is why most of my series only have 4 books, 3 to 4, because I see diminishing returns with each one. I know some people write 12 or 20 book series. I just never had that kind of luck. I always sell better with the first one in the second one. And when you can package 3 or 4 books in a omnibus collection, that does pretty well. But I just can't see myself writing like a 15 or 20 book series. I would think that at some point you'd wind up putting more time into it than it's worth monetarily.
Well, and there's so many creative people. You have so many ideas, I'm sure, that you're like, well, I don't need to continue on with this series if I can start a new one. Play with that creative.
I have a lot of ideas for different. I mean, I'm still in the same universe with these series that I'm writing right now because it's easier to plot when I don't have to world build everything, and come up with a new history and new historical characters and everything. I have what I call my Birthright universe. It came from that book Birthright. And I have now 12 books in it and working on the next 3. And they're all in that same universe. And I have a bunch of other ideas for things outside of it. But I feel like it's safer to finish getting everything I can out of this universe before I move on to something else.
Well, because you already have fans that love that universe.
Right.
And I think a lot of people don't, if you don't think authors, there's a different perspective where you're creating versus people who are consuming. Okay. So when I'm reading and if I love a universe, I want to spend as much time, and it's universe, world, whatever, characters. Like if you aren't writing in fantasy or sci-fi, it might just be, character setting, like, oh, it's in Ireland. I love books set in Ireland or whatever it is. But if you, people who love them will keep on coming back because they like to spend time in that world that you've created or in that universe that you've created. So I totally understand that.
I really honestly I'd love to write this fantasy series that I've had in my head since the 1980s, but it would take a year because what I have them envisioned as is like 120, 150,000 word novels, 3 of them. And that's going to take a year between plotting and writing. And I'm like, do I want to take a year off of writing everything else to write these 3 novels in a genre that I have no experience in and no fan base? It's a tough one.
Ooh. Oh my gosh, I'm so tempted right now to be like, why don't you tell us a little snippet and see if you get some response from people, Rick?
Well, sure. I'll tell you something about it's a pretty see, I am, when it comes to fantasy, and I love fantasy, I'm kind of old fashioned. I like reading Tolkien-esque fantasy with the dragons and the orcs and the elves and the dwarves. And I know people are in the dark, Game of Thrones and Brandon Sanderson, where everything's miserable and everybody hates each other and they're all killing each other. But I like the old style epic quest type fantasy. But I wanted to make a more of a patina for verisimilitude for it. So I started thinking of how can I make this make sense? Because introducing magic, I'm a science fiction guy. So introducing magic is a very hard thing for me to do. It kind of goes against my I mean, I write space opera, so I'm good with hand wavium. I'm good with oh, there's this other dimension that you can use to travel faster than light. But when it comes to something where you're having basically otherworldly beings doing favors for you and shooting lightning bolts, I had to come up with something that would make sense to me. So I came up with a scientific explanation that took just one probably impossible thing and then built everything else on top of that. So basically, I came up with the idea that there's a universal mind.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean by universal mind? That everything has a consciousness to it. That there's a consciousness built into the fabric of space-time. But since light speed is a factor, it can't think on a universal level because the thoughts can't travel far enough. So it's not like a being that's the whole universe that's thinking like a god. It's just thought, scattered thought. But if space-time, then I started thinking if space-time is made up of thought, well, Einstein tells us when you have a big enough mass, it warps space-time into a little bubble. That's why planets have orbits. That's why they have gravity. I said, well, what if every time there's a planet or a star or even an asteroid that warps space-time into this little bubble of gravity, you split off part of that universal mind into a being that can now think and has thoughts, but it thinks different than we do because it's huge and disembodied. And I thought maybe if these could communicate with other people, they would think they were gods. That's the background behind it. And I used that to explain the whole Tolkien-esque milieu where you've got elves, because elves and orcs and dwarves and humans, all genetic experiments of these beings who want to have worshipers to talk to because they're lonely or they're rivals of the other local gods. So that was how I kind of justified everything in my head.
I love that. That's very, very cool. And then
I based the human religion in this thing on, I don't know if you ever heard of Zoroastrianism.
No, I have not.
It was the religion of the ancient Persians. Basically, it's one of the first. It's the word I'm looking for, where you have a good god and a bad god.
Mm-hmm.
It's a dualistic religion. Mm-hmm. You have good and evil gods, and the good god is it started out as another name which I cannot remember off the top of my head, but when the Romans adopted it, the good god became Mithra. So the Romans had Mithraism. It was a religion of Roman soldiers, basically, in the pre-Christian era. So I used Mithra because it was easier than trying to remember the name of the original one, which is in ancient Persian, and it was really long and didn't really roll off the tongue when you're trying to get somebody to say something inside their head while they're reading it. And then the evil being was called Ahriman, and Mithra was a god of like fire and light and the sun, and they worshipped him by sacrificing bulls, and the symbol was the bull with the horns, and Ahriman was the god of darkness. And it was one of the first religions to have a heaven and a hell. And it was just a neat religion that few people have heard of. And it's like, this would be cool to just put this in here because if you have a real religion instead of something you made up, then it'll have little details that add to the realistic, not realism obviously because it's fantasy, but kind of the
richness,
the richness. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It'll make it seem real to the characters.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. So that's
a fantasy novel. That's the fantasy series I'd like to write.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you guys, people, listeners, if you have any interest in Rick writing from this new fantasy world, because I'm not a huge science fiction reader, but I really like epic fantasy that you're talking about, like sword, sorcery, epic. Like that's really a big thing. So you guys, if you're like me, or if you just like to, give him some encouragement and some feedback, go ahead. And find Rick Partlow, go find his email, go find his Facebook, and send him a note saying, I'd read it. Put me on your newsletter list for the fantasy book.
I'll prepare myself for the wave of interest.
Yes. What advice could you give to other authors who are just starting and wanting to be successful?
You need to find a way to connect with fans. I know Facebook and mailing lists are where most people go. And if you can find a way to get your own mailing list, it is your own. It's something that belongs to you and is not connected to other people's third party things like Facebook or Amazon. But however you find a way to do it, you need to connect with people who you think are going to like your books. I got lucky and connected with people in the pre-Facebook days, message boards. But there's a lot of ways to do it. If you can, there's Facebook groups that are fans of certain genres or writers. I've heard from people, I haven't tried this, that if you start a Facebook group as fans of science fiction or whatever genre you're writing in, and you can get people who are fans of that, you can slip in your books without being obnoxious about it and build a fan base that way. But however you do it, you have to build your own fan base because the market is so crowded, especially in the genres, in romance, in science fiction, and fantasy, urban fantasy especially. Oh my God. Ever since Jim Butcher, there's just been like a glut of urban fantasy. Paranormal romance, all of those are just packed with writers, packed with people trying to advertise their books. So you can't count on just running ads or just doing giveaways. You have to find a way to build your audience from people that love the same thing you do. And it's easy for me to say that, I know, because I came in before all that, but I see people do it. They build their audience. If you can do it, I know that in genre fiction especially, if you can get a more successful author to collaborate with you on a book, but you're going to have to write something impressive for them to be interested. But that's a good way to get your name out there. I mean, I mentioned Michael Anderle. He's done that a lot with different people. And now those people have successful careers because they wrote in Michael Anderle's universe. Michael Cooper, he calls himself MD Cooper on Amazon for his books, but he's done that. Richard Fox collaborates with a lot of people. So if you find an author who writes in your genre that you like his work, and it's something that you feel like you're writing something similar, if you can contact them, if they've heard of you, if they're impressed by your work, collaborating with somebody is a good way to break in. There's a lot of different strategies, but you're going to have to come up with something beyond just putting advertisements out there, because it doesn't work as well for newcomers anymore because there's too much out there.
And also, I'm going to add on to that, have a really, really, really good story.
Yes, that goes without saying. I read a lot. I don't want to insult anybody. I'm not going to say where, but I read a lot of people saying, I'm paying this much money. I'm paying thousands of dollars for editors and proofreaders and cover artists and marketing, and I'm not selling, and I'm still haven't made my money back. And I want to ask them, but I don't because it would be rude. How good is your book? Is it fun to read? Did you connect with the genre audience that you're trying to connect with? Because even if you write well, if you don't write what people want to read, it's not going to bring them in. If I write in space opera and military science fiction, which by the way are two different things, and you can't write the same book for each of those. Although I have series that have one book in military science fiction, the rest in space opera. But those books approach things differently. The first book is with the military science fiction is different. It's written differently. And in between genres, it's even worse. You have to, in romance, you have to give them a happily ever after.
You have to. You have to
have them meet cute and then have a falling out over something stupid and then get back together after the adversity.
You guys, I'm just saying, Rick has already admitted to not reading romance. So, but he is 100% right. But I'm just saying,
in space opera, you have to have in most space opera, you have to have a hopeful ending. You can't have a downer ending. It's not really space opera if you have a downer ending. It's something else. In military science fiction, you can get away with having a downer ending. But in space opera, you have to have an upbeat ending. You have to have aliens and broad scope. And if you don't give people what they want, then you're marketing your book wrong. Mm-hmm. You know, and there's books that you can cross genre, and people have done it, but it's a lot harder.
Yeah.
You have to write what people want to read. And just because your writing is mistake free still doesn't mean it's interesting. You have to have characters that will draw people in. And I think too many people nowadays get absorbed with the minutia, with the details of the mechanics of doing it, and they don't concentrate enough anymore on building their world and building their characters that people will really be interested in. And I mean, people, I keep going back to them, but like Michael Anderle, like M.D. Cooper, because they're in my genre.
Yeah.
When they first started out, they weren't writing well. I mean, as far as mechanically, Anderle will be the first to tell you his books were horrible. They were horribly edited. They're self-edited, misspellings everywhere, bad formatting. My books were badly formatting. I had typos still, even after having it scrubbed through by editors over and over from my agent, there were still typos. Mm-hmm. So imagine how badly you're going to do it self-editing. And he had horrible books, but what he had was a really interesting character that was compelling to people. So they read it anyway. And even if they wrote reviews that said, oh my God, this is horribly edited, look at all these misspellings, they said, but it's a really cool story.
Yeah.
That's what's important. What's important is not that people say, oh, cover is the most important thing. Well, it's the important thing to draw somebody's eye to it. But if they go on the look inside after looking at that cover and it's dull, if it's not a story that draws them in, then it doesn't matter if you have $1,000 cover by the best cover artist in the world. You have to write something that grabs people, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. If you don't, then you need to go back to the craft and worry less about mechanics.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's amazing advice. I love it. Because I really like getting to the core. Because what happens when you stick to the core principles, writing, marketing, etc., then you don't have to worry about Facebook algorithms. You don't have to worry about strategies and tactics as much, because the core of marketing is getting your book in front of people who want to read it. That's the core. All of these tactics and strategies are just different ways of finding the people who love science fiction or love space opera and then saying, hey, I've got a book.
That's why I don't like to say you have to market. It's more, you have to connect with your audience.
Yeah. And so that's
however you do that, that's the most important thing. If you I didn't spend $1 on marketing, and my book happened to connect with the right audience, and it was a bestseller, and I didn't spend any money on marketing. Now, I couldn't duplicate that, obviously. It was
2011 is very different than 2018.
Well, no, I mean, Glory Boy, the recent one, 2016, I didn't spend any money on marketing that book, but it happened to connect with the right audience at the right time. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to recreate that. Like I said, I probably couldn't do it, but if the book hadn't been there to connect, if it hadn't been the kind of book that connected with that audience, it wouldn't have mattered if I spent, thousands of dollars on marketing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because they wouldn't have kept reading through to the trilogy that in the end made me more money than that one book. So you have to be able to connect with your audience, and if you do it by being on a blog, or some people have their own podcasts and they use that to to connect with an audience. There's people that have blogs that are very popular. There's people that have Facebook pages that are not specific to their books, that are general science fiction pages, and they've connected that way. But if you can't find, you need to find those people that want to read what you're writing, because advertising will only do so much. It's not going to be, for the most part, it's not going to be what they call evergreen. You're going to have to keep refreshing it and refreshing it and refreshing it.
Yeah.
And it's only a short-term solution.
It'll get you in front of people that maybe you wouldn't have beforehand, but you still have to maintain the relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some people that are experts at refreshing those ads and making them more, but they also have a long series of really compelling books that get people to keep reading at that point. Because that's the key. If I hadn't had the 3 Birthright novels that were in the same universe as Glory Boy, it wouldn't have mattered that Glory Boy did that well. Because those other 3 books told a story that people were interested in.
Yeah.
And if the story wasn't there, if I started repeating myself and doing the same plot over and over, I wouldn't have been able to keep those people in there. So
yeah,
it's important that people who think they want to make a living at writing don't go too far the other direction, because I've seen it happen. People going too far in the direction of, I need to be a marketer first and a writer second. No, you still need to be a writer. Marketing is great. Maybe you can help sell other people's books, but if you're not a writer, if you're not a creator,
I like that.
All that marketing is not going to do anything. Once those people read the first book, they'll be like, oh yeah, okay. And that's it. You're done.
Can you say that again?
Which part? You have to be a creator first.
If you're not a creator, oh, that's so good. If you're not a creator,
then the marketing won't help.
Yeah, that was so great. And I interrupted you. Love it. Because I was like, yes, I just got tingles. Okay. So Rick, where's the best place for people to get to start introducing themselves to you and build that friendly relationship between you and your fans, and or purchase your books?
Well, to introduce themselves to me on a personal level, my Facebook author page is probably the best one, and that is facebook.com/Duty Honor Planet. That's the address. It's called the Science Fiction Worlds of Rick Partlow. But when I first started the page, I used my Duty Honor Planet series name in there, which I probably shouldn't have done, but I was new to this.
You was new. It's still a good Duty Honor Planet is still general enough that it's still good.
So that's if you want to connect with me on Facebook, that's where I have a website, an author blog that's at rickpartlow.com. But the best place to find my books is to go on Amazon and just search for Rick Partlow. There's only 2 of us. One of them's a bit part actor who doesn't have any science fiction books, and I'm the only other one.
And we will also link to this in the show notes. You guys will have links to his website and his Facebook at authorlikeaboss.com. So if you don't want to have to search and be like, which Rick Partlow is it? We'll be linking directly to his Amazon page. Okay. Thank you so much, Rick, for being here. This has been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate your time. And
thanks for having me on.
Yeah. And thank you, everybody, for listening here at Author Like a Boss. Hugs and happy authoring.
Welcome to the Author Like a Boss podcast, the podcast for indie authors who want to improve their writing, up-level their marketing, make money with their books, and have fun doing it. Now, on to the show with your host, ALAB Barnard.